I didn't know the man watching me had built an empire on silence, until the night he decided I would break it. The tray felt heavier than it should have. 6 champagne flutes balanced between my fingers as I moved through the ballroom. Careful, invisible, exactly how I liked it. Because invisible meant safe, and safe meant no one asked questions I couldn't afford to answer. The music was soft, something classical I didn't recognize, and the air smelled like expensive cologne and polished marble. The kind of place where people wore watches that cost more than my rent for a year, and I kept my eyes down. Because girls like me didn't belong in rooms like this. Not really. We just passed through them, carried their drinks, cleaned up their messes, disappeared when the night was over. My name is Lin Tran, and I had been on my feet for 9 hours straight, smiling when I had to, nodding when spoken to, pretending I didn't notice the way people looked past me like I wasn't fully there. And that was fine. I preferred it that way, because attention came with a price, and I had learned a long time ago that I couldn't pay it. Careful, my manager whispered as he passed, his voice tight, eyes scanning the room like something could go wrong at any second. And maybe it could, because the energy tonight felt different, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. I adjusted my grip on the tray and stepped toward the center of the ballroom, where the real power sat. Men in dark suits, women in dresses that shimmered under the chandeliers, laughter that sounded practiced, controlled. Nothing real, nothing raw, just performance. That's when I felt it. Not a touch, not even a sound, just a shift, subtle but undeniable, like the temperature in the room dropped a few degrees, and my skin reacted before my mind could catch up. A quiet warning I didn't understand yet. I looked up, just for a second, just long enough to see him. He stood near the far end of the room, slightly apart from the others, not because he didn't belong, but because everything around him adjusted to make space. Tall, still, composed in a way that didn't feel natural, like he had trained himself to exist without unnecessary movement. His suit perfectly tailored, dark as midnight, his presence cutting through the noise without making a sound. And people noticed, not openly, not obviously, but they shifted, conversations softened, glances flickered and then disappeared, like no one wanted to be caught staring too long. I should have looked away, and I did, for half a second, but something pulled my gaze back, something I couldn't explain, and that's when it happened. His eyes found mine. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music swelling, no sudden realization, just a moment, quiet, precise, like a decision being made in real time. His expression didn't change, not even slightly, but I felt it anyway, the weight of being seen, not as a waitress, not as background noise, but as something else. My heart stuttered, just once, and I told myself it was nothing, just a stranger looking in my direction. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. So I forced myself to move, to keep walking, to deliver the drinks, to pretend I hadn't noticed. Because that's what you do when something feels dangerous. You ignore it. You stay small. You don't give it a reason to follow you. I set the glasses down one by one, my hands steady despite the strange tension settling in my chest, and I was already turning to leave when I heard it. Not loud, not commanding in the way movies make it seem. Just a low voice, controlled, effortless, but it carried, cutting through the room like it belonged there more than anything else. Bring her to me. I froze, just for a second, not long enough for anyone to notice, but long enough for something inside me to shift, because I knew, without understanding how, that he wasn't talking about someone else. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't need to. I could feel it, the attention, the decision, the quiet inevitability of what came next, and for the first time that night, invisible didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like something I had just lost. I should have kept walking, should have stayed exactly what I was 5 seconds ago, invisible, replaceable, safe, but my feet did not move, not the way I wanted them to, because something in that voice had already reached me, already decided for me, and when I finally turned, it was not him I saw first, it was the men around him, the ones who moved without hesitation, without asking questions, like they had been waiting for that single sentence all night. One of them approached me with a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Miss, we need you to come with us," he said quietly, like this was normal, like this happened every day, and for a second I almost laughed because it was so absurd, so completely disconnected from my reality that my brain tried to reject it. I am working, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt, fingers tightening around the empty tray as if it could anchor me to something familiar. Then you are done for the night, he said, just as calm, just as certain, and that certainty was what made my chest tighten, because people like him did not negotiate, they informed. I glanced toward my manager, instinctively searching for someone to step in, to correct this, to say there had been a mistake, but he was already looking away, pretending not to see, his shoulders stiff, his silence louder than anything he could have said, and that was when I understood. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a decision that had already been accepted by everyone in the room except me. I cannot just leave, I said, quieter now, more to myself than to him. But he only tilted his head slightly, like he was giving me the illusion of choice. You can, he replied, and you will. And something in his tone made arguing feel pointless, like trying to stop a tide with your hands. I set the tray down slowly, careful, deliberate, because if I rushed, if I showed fear, it would make this real in a way I was not ready for, and I needed one more second to breathe, one more second to think. But time did not belong to me anymore, not tonight. They did not touch me, not once, but they did not need to. Their presence guided me, directed me, and before I realized it, I was walking across the ballroom, past the same people who had ignored me an hour ago, except now they were watching, subtle, careful, pretending not to, but I could feel it. The shift, the curiosity, the quiet recognition that something had changed. The distance between us closed too quickly, each step louder than the last in my own head, until I was standing a few feet away from him, close enough to see the details I had missed before, the faint lines near his eyes that suggested he did not smile often, the way his posture never relaxed, like even stillness required control. And when his gaze lifted to meet mine again, it was sharper this time, more focused, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. No one spoke, not at first, the silence stretching just long enough to feel intentional, like part of the process, like he was studying me the way people studied something rare, something they did not fully understand yet. What is your name? He asked finally, his voice lower now, meant only for me, and I hesitated, not because I did not know the answer, but because saying it felt like stepping into something I could not step out of. Lynn, I said, the word barely leaving my lips, and for a second, just a second, something in his expression shifted, not softer, not warmer, just interested, in a way that made my pulse quicken. He did not reach for me, did not move closer, and somehow that made it worse, because distance meant control, and control meant this was not impulse, it was intention. Look at me, he said, not harsh, not demanding, but absolute, and I realized then that I already was, that I had not looked away since the moment I stepped in front of him, and I did not know why that terrified me more than anything else, because it meant some part of me had already stopped resisting, and I did not know when that happened or how to undo it. There was something wrong with the way he looked at me, not hungry, not impressed, not even curious in the way men usually were. It was quieter than that, sharper, like he was trying to solve something that did not make sense, and I did not like being a question I could not answer. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, the way I used to when things felt out of control, because panic would only make this worse. And I needed to stay clear, present, aware of every word, every movement, every shift in his expression. You do not belong here, he said after a moment, not as an insult, not even as a judgment, just a fact, and I felt my spine straighten before I could stop it, because that was the first thing he had gotten wrong. I work here, I replied, my voice low but firm, and for the first time, something changed, not in the room, not in the people around us, but in him. A slight pause, a fraction of a second where his gaze sharpened just a little more, like he had not expected that answer, like resistance was something he was not used to encountering so directly. That is not what I meant, he said, and there was something beneath the words now, something quieter, something that felt more personal than it should have been. I should have looked away, should have broken whatever invisible thread had formed between us, but I did not, and that was my first mistake, because the longer I held his gaze, the more it felt like stepping deeper into something I could not see the end of. Then what did you mean? I asked, and I heard it as soon as I said it, the challenge in my voice, small but real, and for a second I wanted to take it back, to retreat, to become invisible again, but it was too late, because he had already heard it, already registered it, and now it belonged to him. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement, like he had just discovered something unexpected and was deciding what to do with it. "You are not afraid," he said, and I almost laughed because that was the second thing he had gotten wrong. I was afraid, more than I had been in a long time, but fear did not always look the way people expected it to. "I am," I said honestly, and that seemed to interest him even more, because honesty was not what he was used to either. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, not empty, but full of something unspoken, something building just beneath the surface. And I could feel it pressing in from all sides. The room, the people, the weight of his attention, all of it narrowing down to this one moment that felt too important for something that had started less than 5 minutes ago. "Then why are you still looking at me?" he asked, his voice softer now, but no less controlled. And that question caught me off guard, not because I did not have an answer, but because I did not want to say it out loud. I hesitated, just long enough for him to notice, because of course he noticed everything. And then I exhaled slowly, choosing the truth again, even though it felt dangerous, even though it felt like giving him something he could use. "Because you asked me to," I said, and this time, the reaction was impossible to miss. Not a full change, not something anyone else would have seen, but I felt it, the shift in the air between us, the way his attention deepened, the way the space seemed to tighten just a little more, like the rules had just changed in a way neither of us had planned. He took a step closer, not enough to invade my space, just enough to make the distance feel intentional, measured, and for the first time since this started, I realized something that sent a quiet, unsettling thought through my mind. He was not trying to control me the way I had expected. He was watching, waiting, letting me choose my responses, and somehow that made everything more dangerous, because it meant whatever came next would not be forced. It would be something I walked into on my own, and I was not sure I knew how to stop myself anymore. The air shifted again when he stepped closer, not enough to touch me, but enough to make the space between us feel like something deliberate, something chosen, and I realized then that every inch of distance in this moment belonged to him, not by force, not by command, but by control so quiet it almost felt invisible. I tightened my fingers at my sides, grounding myself in something physical, something real, because the longer I stood there, the easier it became to forget where I ended and this situation began. "You answer carefully," he said, his voice measured, like he was testing the weight of each word before letting it exist, and I was not sure if that was a compliment or a warning. "I try to," I replied, and this time I did not hesitate, because hesitation felt like weakness here, and I did not know what weakness would cost me in a room like this. His gaze lingered, not on my face alone, but on everything, the way I stood, the way I held myself, the small details most people ignored, and it felt like being read without permission, like he was turning pages I had never meant to show anyone. "Most people would have looked away by now," he continued, and there it was again, that subtle observation that made everything feel less like a conversation and more like an evaluation. "Most people were not asked to stay," I said, and I saw it, just for a second, that same almost smile, the one that never fully formed, like he did not allow himself that kind of expression completely. The silence that followed was different now, not tense, not uncertain, but charged, like something had settled into place between us, something neither of us had planned, but both of us recognized. Around us, the room continued, as if nothing had changed, music playing, glasses clinking, quiet conversations filling the air, but it all felt distant, muted, like I was standing inside a moment that existed outside of everything else. "You should go back to your work," he said suddenly, and the words caught me off guard, not because of what they meant, but because of what they did not. There was no command to stay, no demand, no attempt to keep me there longer than necessary, and for a second, I did not move, because I had expected something else, something more definitive, something that would explain why I had been brought here in the first place. "That is it?" I asked before I could stop myself, and the moment the words left my mouth, I felt the shift again, subtle but immediate, like I had crossed a line I did not fully understand. His eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, not in irritation, but in focus, like I had just become more interesting by asking the wrong question. Is it not enough? He replied, and there was something in his tone now, something quieter, something that suggested this had never been about what I thought it was. I held his gaze, even though every instinct told me to step back, to retreat, to end this before it went any further. But I needed to understand, needed something to make sense of why I had been singled out in a room full of people who were far more important, far more noticeable, far more everything than I was. You brought me here, I said, my voice steady despite the way my pulse had started to rise again. For what? The question lingered between us, heavier than anything I had said before. And for a moment, he did not answer, not immediately, and that pause felt intentional, like he was deciding how much to reveal, how much to let me see. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more deliberate than before. To see if I was mistaken, he said, and that answer did not make sense, not yet. But something about the way he said it made it feel important, like a piece of something larger I could not fully grasp. And were you? I asked, because stopping now felt impossible, like I had already stepped too far into this to pretend it did not matter. This time, there was no almost smile, no subtle shift, just a quiet certainty in his expression that made my breath catch before he even spoke. No, he said simply, and in that single word, I felt it, the beginning of something I did not understand yet, something that felt less like a coincidence and more like a decision that had already been made, and somehow, I had just become a part of it. The word stayed with me longer than it should have, echoing in the quiet space between my thoughts even as the world around us slowly returned. Conversations resuming, music filling the gaps, people pretending nothing had shifted while I stood there feeling like everything had. I should have left then, should have taken the exit he had given me and walked back into the safety of routine, into the version of the night where I was just a waitress again. But my feet did not move, not right away, because something in his answer had rooted me in place, something unfinished, something that did not feel like the end of anything. Then why let me go? I asked before I could stop myself, and I felt it immediately, that subtle tightening in the air, not from him alone, but from everything around him, like even the question had weight it was not supposed to carry. His gaze did not waver, did not soften, but there was a pause this time, longer than before, and I realized he was not used to being asked questions he had not already answered in his own mind. Because you will come back, he said finally, his voice quiet, certain in a way that did not sound like confidence, but like fact, and that certainty unsettled me more than anything else he had said so far. You do not know that, I replied, even though part of me already understood that he did, not because of who I was, but because of how this worked, how power moved, how decisions like his did not exist without outcomes already set in motion. His expression did not change, but something behind it sharpened again, like he was measuring the space between what I said and what I believed. No, he agreed, but I know people, and there it was, the quiet reminder that whatever this was, it was not about me alone, it was about patterns, about instincts he trusted more than words. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself, because the longer I stayed, the easier it became to forget that I had a choice, even if it felt smaller by the second. Then you are wrong, I said, not because I was sure, but because I needed to say it, needed to draw a line somewhere before it disappeared completely. For the first time, the almost smile returned, faint, controlled, like a reaction he allowed himself only in fragments, and it did. Something unexpected to my chest, something I refused to examine too closely. We will see, he said, and there was no challenge in it, no threat, just a quiet acceptance of time as something that would prove him right or me. The conversation ended there, not with a dismissal, not with a command, but with a stillness that felt like a pause rather than an ending. And that unsettled me more than anything else because it meant this was not finished, not really. I took a step back, then another, each movement deliberate, controlled, because turning away too quickly would feel like running, and I refused to give him that, refused to let this moment define me in a way I could not take back. His gaze followed. I felt it without looking, a constant presence that did not need to move to stay fixed on me, and it stayed there even as I turned. Even as I walked away, even as the distance grew between us, the ballroom felt different now, louder and yet somehow more distant, like I was moving through a version of it that no longer fit the way it had before, every sound slightly sharper, every glance slightly heavier. And I realized that nothing around me had changed, not really, only my awareness of it had. I reached the edge of the room, my hands steady despite the quiet storm building in my chest. And for a moment, I let myself breathe, just one full breath, grounding myself in something that felt like mine again. I told myself it was over, that I would finish my shift, go home, and tomorrow would be the same as every other day, predictable, manageable, safe. But even as I thought it, I knew it was not true, because something had shifted in a way that did not simply disappear. And as I stepped back into the rhythm of work, picking up another tray, forcing my focus onto something simple, something familiar, I felt it again, not his voice this time, not even his presence, just the quiet certainty of what he had said settling into place whether I wanted it to or not. Because deep down, somewhere I did not want to look too closely, I already knew one thing I could not explain. I had not walked away completely. Not really. The rest of the night moved, but I did not feel like I was part of it anymore. Not completely. Like something had stayed behind in that space where he had been standing, something I had not meant to leave there. I kept my head down, focused on the small things, the weight of the tray, the rhythm of steps across polished floors, the quiet repetition of "excuse me" and "thank you." Because routine was safe. Routine did not ask questions, but every few seconds my awareness slipped, pulled back to the memory of his voice, the way it had not needed to be loud to be heard, the way it had settled into me like something that belonged there. "You are off in 10, my manager said as he passed, his tone careful, almost too careful, like he was choosing his words with more attention than usual, and I nodded without looking at him, because I did not want to see whatever expression he was trying to hide. 10 minutes felt longer than the entire night had before that moment, each second stretching, dragging, like something was waiting on the other side of it, something I was not ready to face but could not avoid. When the clock finally moved, when I finally set the tray down for the last time, there was no relief, no sense of ending, just a quiet shift from one kind of uncertainty to another. I changed quickly, the staff room smaller than it had felt earlier, the fluorescent lights harsher, everything too bright, too real, and for a moment I stood there, staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to find the version of myself that had walked into this night without knowing how it would end. She looked the same, but something behind her eyes had changed, something quieter, more aware, like she had seen something she could not unsee. I grabbed my bag and stepped out into the hallway, the noise of the ballroom fading behind me with each step, replaced by something calmer, emptier. And that should have made it easier, but it did not, because silence left too much room for thoughts I could not control. The exit doors opened with a soft push, and the night air hit me immediately, cool and steady, a sharp contrast to the heavy warmth inside. And I inhaled deeply, letting it fill my lungs, grounding myself in something real, something that belonged to me again. The street was quieter than I expected, a few cars passing, distant city sounds blending into a low hum, normal, ordinary, exactly what I needed, and for a moment I almost believed it, that I could just walk away, go home, sleep, wake up, and everything would return to what it had been before. I started down the sidewalk, my steps steady, measured, each one carrying me further from the building, further from him, and I focused on that distance, on the simple act of leaving, because leaving meant control, leaving meant choice. But then I noticed it, not immediately, not in a way I could point to, just a subtle shift, the same feeling I had inside, that quiet awareness that something was not quite the same as it had been a moment ago. I slowed slightly, my grip tightening on the strap of my bag, not out of fear, not exactly, but out of instinct, the kind that tells you to pay attention even when nothing is obviously wrong. I told myself it was nothing, just the aftereffect of a long night. Too many unfamiliar moments stacked too close together, but the feeling did not go away. It stayed with me. Steady, persistent, like a question waiting to be answered. I reached the corner and paused, glancing at the street ahead, at the lights, the passing cars, everything exactly as it should be. And yet something in me hesitated, just for a second too long. And that was when I understood what unsettled me the most. It was not that something was happening. It was that I did not know if it had ever stopped, because some part of me, the part one could not ignore anymore, was already listening for. Something that had not even happened yet, already waiting in a way that felt dangerously close to expectation, and I hated how natural that felt. I told myself to keep walking, to turn the corner and not look back, because looking back meant I was already involved in something I did not understand, but my steps slowed anyway, not stopping, just less certain, like my body was negotiating with a decision my mind had already made. The streetlight above flickered once, casting a brief shadow that stretched longer than it should have, and I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax, forcing my thoughts into something rational, something grounded, because nothing had actually happened, not out here, not now, just a long night and a stranger who had said words that should not matter as much as they did. A car passed, headlights sweeping across the sidewalk, and for a second everything felt normal again. Just another night in the city, just another shift finished, just me heading home like I had done 100 times before. But then it returned, that same quiet awareness. Not fear, not danger, just presence, like something had aligned itself with my path without announcing it. I reached into my bag for my phone, more out of habit than necessity, the screen lighting up with the time. 11:42, later than I liked but not unusual, and I stared at it for a second longer than needed, grounding myself in numbers, in something measurable, something that did not shift without reason. When I looked up again, the street felt slightly different, not empty, not unsafe, just observed, and I hated that thought, hated how quickly it formed, how easily it settled into place like it belonged. There, you are imagining things, I whispered under my breath, the words soft but firm, because saying them made them feel more real, more controllable, and I needed control right now, even if it was only over my own thoughts. I started walking again, faster this time, not running, just enough to remind myself that I was moving forward, that I was choosing direction, that nothing and no one was deciding that for me. The sound of footsteps reached me then, faint at first, almost lost beneath the distant hum of traffic, and I told myself it was nothing, just someone else on the same street. The city never truly empty, never truly quiet, but something about the rhythm did not match, not quite, like it was too steady, too consistent, and my grip tightened slightly around my phone without me realizing it. I did not turn around, not yet, because turning would make it real in a way I could not undo. And I needed one more second of uncertainty before I confirmed anything. The footsteps did not get closer, but they did not fade either, staying at the same distance, the same pace, like a shadow that knew exactly how far to remain without disappearing. I stopped suddenly, not planned, just instinct, and the sound behind me stopped too. Silence settled in, heavier this time, thicker, and my pulse picked up before I could control it. Not panic, just awareness sharpening into something more precise. Slowly, carefully, I turned. There was no one directly behind me, no figure stepping into the light, no obvious presence to match what I had heard, just the empty stretch of sidewalk and the soft glow of street lamps reaching into the distance. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding, a small, controlled release, because that was what this was, nothing, just a long night and a mind that had not caught up yet. But as I turned back forward, ready to continue walking, I saw it. Not a person, not movement, just a car parked along the curb that had not been there a moment ago. Dark, still, engine quiet, and I told myself it had always been there, that I had just missed it, that there was a reasonable explanation for everything, but something in my chest tightened anyway. Because I did not remember seeing it before, and more importantly, I could feel it, that same presence again, not behind me this time, but ahead, waiting, patient in a way that made his words return without warning, clear and certain as if he had just spoken them. And for the first time since I left the building, I realized something I did not want to accept. I was not the one deciding where this ended. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the car like it might explain itself if I just waited long enough, like something would shift and make this feel ordinary again. But nothing did. It remained exactly as it was, still, quiet, the windows too dark to see through, and that was what unsettled me the most, not what I could see, but what I could not. I told myself to move, to keep walking, because standing still only gave my thoughts more space to spiral into something they did not need to become, and I had already given this night more attention than it deserved. One step, Then another, steady, controlled, as if I had decided everything was fine, as if nothing about this moment was different from any other walk home. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at the car again, because looking would mean acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would make it real in a way I was not ready to accept. The sound came next, soft, almost too quiet to notice at first, the subtle click of a door unlocking, precise, deliberate, and my breath caught before I could stop it. Not a gasp, not panic, just a brief interruption in the rhythm I had been trying so hard to maintain. I slowed without meaning to, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, and I hated that. Hated how instinct could betray control so easily. The car door opened, smooth, controlled, no rush, no urgency, just quiet intention, and I felt it again. That same presence, the same certainty that had followed me out of the building and into the night. I did not turn immediately. I could not, because part of me still wanted to believe I could walk past this, that I could pretend none of it was connected, that this was just coincidence, just timing, just another person stepping out into the same city I lived in. But deep down, I already knew better. You walk like you are trying to leave something behind, his voice said, calm, measured, exactly the same as before, and the moment it reached me, everything inside me stilled, not because I was surprised, but because I was not. I turned slowly, not rushed, not hesitant, just enough to face him without giving away how much that single sentence had settled into me. He stood by the open door, one hand resting lightly against it, his posture as composed as it had been inside, as if the change in setting had not affected him at all, as if this moment had been expected from the beginning. I replied, and this time there was no hesitation, no need to choose my words carefully, because the truth felt simpler now, clearer in the quiet of the street than it had in the noise of the ballroom. His gaze held mine, steady, unreadable in the dim light, and for a second, neither of us moved, the space between us filled with something that felt less like tension and more like inevitability. And is it working? He asked, and there was something different in his tone now, not softer, not warmer, just closer, like the distance between question and answer had narrowed in a way I could not ignore. I considered it, just for a moment, because answering honestly felt dangerous, but answering anything else felt pointless. No, I said quietly, and I felt it the second the word left me. The shift, subtle but real, like something had just aligned in a way neither of us needed to acknowledge out loud. He nodded once, not in approval, not in satisfaction, just recognition, like he had expected nothing else. Good, he said, and that single word carried more weight than it should have, settling into the space between us like something final, something that closed a door I had not realized was still open. I should have stepped back then, should have created distance, should have reminded myself that I still had a choice. But I did not, because standing there felt easier than leaving, easier than pretending this was something I could simply walk away from. Why are you here? I asked, even though I already knew the answer would not be simple, and part of me was not sure I wanted it to be. He did not answer right away, his gaze shifting briefly, not away from me, but through me, like he was considering something beyond the question itself. And when he spoke, his voice was lower, more deliberate. Because you did not, he said, and that answer settled into me in a way I could not explain. Because it was not about where I was standing, it was about something else. Entirely, something I had not admitted even to myself yet. And for the first time since this began, I realized I was no longer trying to leave, not really. His answer did not feel like an explanation. It felt like a mirror, reflecting something I had not wanted to admit. And for a moment I stood there, caught between stepping forward and stepping back, between holding on to control and letting it slip just enough to see where this would go. That is not a reason, I said quietly, even though the words felt thinner than before, less certain, like I was arguing out of habit rather than belief. He closed the car door without looking away from me. The sound soft but final. And then he took a step closer, not enough to close the distance completely, just enough to remind me that it existed because he allowed it to. It is, he replied, and there was no insistence in his tone, no need to convince me. Just that same quiet certainty that made everything feel less like a discussion and more like something already decided. I folded my arms lightly, not defensive, just grounding, giving myself something to hold on to that was mine, because the longer I stood here, the easier it became to forget where my boundaries were supposed to be. You assume a lot, I said, and this time there was a faint edge to my voice, not sharp, but present, something that had not been there before. His gaze shifted slightly, not away, but deeper, like he was adjusting his focus, recalibrating the way he was reading me. I observe, he corrected, and the distinction mattered more than I wanted it to, because observation meant attention, and attention meant this was not random, not fleeting, it was deliberate in a way I could not ignore. The street felt quieter now, the distant sounds fading into something barely noticeable, and I realized how isolated this moment had become, how separate it felt from everything else, like the city had stepped back just enough to let this exist on its own. Then observe this, I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. I am going home, and I turned slightly, not fully away, just enough to signal movement, to reclaim direction, to remind both of us that I was not standing still because I had to. I expected him to stop me, to say something that would anchor me back into place, but he did not. He simply watched, and somehow that made it harder to take the next step, because silence left room for doubt, for choice, for the realization that whatever happened next would be mine as much as his. I took one step, then another, the distance between us stretching slowly, and for a moment I almost believed I had shifted something, that I had taken control back in a way that mattered. Lynn, he said, and the sound of my name in his voice stopped me before I could think about it. Not because it was loud, not because it was forceful, but because it was precise, like he had measured exactly how to say it, so that it would reach me no matter what direction I was facing. I closed my eyes for a second, just a second, because I needed that moment to steady myself, to decide whether turning back would be a choice or a surrender. When I opened them, I did not turn around right away. I just stood there, feeling the weight of that single word settle into me. You did not answer my question, he continued, his voice carrying the same calm control as before, and I exhaled slowly, because of course he had not let it go, of course he would not. I turned then, not quickly, not reluctantly, just enough to face him again, and this time the distance between us felt different, not larger, not smaller, just more defined, like we both understood it now in a way we had not before. You did not ask one, I said, and there was something new in my tone, something quieter but stronger, like I had found a balance I had not known I was looking for. His expression shifted, barely, but enough for me to notice, enough for me to understand that this was no longer the same moment it had been minutes ago. Why did you not leave? He asked, and there it was, finally, clear and direct, the question that had been waiting beneath everything else. I felt my pulse steady, not slow, just controlled, because answering that would change something. I could feel it, and I was not sure if I wanted it to. I could have lied, could have given him something simple, something safe, but I did not, because something about him made dishonesty feel pointless. Because you were right, I said quietly, and the truth settled between us, heavier than anything else I had said that night. I did not walk away. And as soon as the words left me, I understood what that meant, not just for him, but for me, because admitting it made it real in a way I could not take back, and for the first time, I was not sure if I wanted to. The moment the words left me, I felt it, not from him, but from myself, a shift so quiet it almost went unnoticed, like something inside me had stepped across a line I had been pretending was not there, and now that it was crossed, there was no pretending anymore. He did not react immediately, and that silence stretched, not empty, not uncertain, but full, like he was letting the weight of what I said settle exactly where it belonged. Honesty, he said finally, his voice lower than before, not softer, just more focused, like the space between us had narrowed in a way that made everything feel more precise, is rare. And the way he said it made it sound less like a compliment and more like a recognition of something he had not expected to find. I held his gaze, steady, even though my pulse had picked up again, not out of fear, not entirely, but out of awareness, because this was no longer about curiosity or coincidence. This was something else, something that felt like it had direction. So, is assuming, I replied, and there was a quiet firmness in my voice now, something that had grown in the space between our last few words, something I had not had when this began. His expression shifted. Again, that subtle, almost imperceptible change that I had started to recognize as interest, not casual, not fleeting, but deliberate, like he was adjusting something internally, recalibrating. "You think I am wrong," he said, not asking, just stating, and I realized then that this was how he moved through conversations, not searching for answers, but placing them, testing them, refining them. "I think you are used to being right," I said, and this time I did not soften it, did not cushion the words, because something in me had stopped wanting to. The air between us held for a second, just long enough to feel the impact of that statement. And then, unexpectedly, he exhaled, not a sigh, not a reaction, just a quiet release, like he had accepted something rather than rejected it. "I am," he said, and there was no arrogance in it, no pride, just fact, and that made it harder to argue against, harder to dismiss. I shifted my weight slightly, grounding myself again, because the longer I stood here, the more it felt like the conversation was pulling me into a rhythm I did not fully control. "That does not mean you are right now," I added, and this time, I saw it clearly, the faintest hint of that almost smile, more visible than before, like something about this exchange was unfolding in a way he had not planned but was choosing not to interrupt. "No," he agreed. And that agreement caught me off guard more than anything else he had said so far, because I had expected resistance. Correction, something that would reassert the balance I had assumed existed. But instead, he simply acknowledged it, like the possibility itself was enough. The streetlight above cast a soft glow across his face, highlighting the stillness in his posture, the control in every small movement. And I realized then that this was not about winning or losing, not for him. It was about something else entirely, something closer to understanding, or maybe selection. "Then what is this?" I asked, the question quieter now, not challenging, not defensive, just honest in a way I had not intended. Because if this was not about control, not entirely, then I needed to know what it was. He did not answer right away, his gaze holding mine with that same steady intensity. And for a moment I wondered if he would not answer at all, if this would remain undefined, something that existed without explanation. But then he stepped closer, not enough to invade, just enough to make the distance feel intentional again, measured, chosen. "It is a beginning," he said, and the simplicity of the words made them heavier, not lighter, because they did not explain, they declared. I felt my breath catch, just slightly, because that was not what I had expected, not what I had prepared for, and something in my chest tightened in response. Not fear, not quite, just the realization that whatever this was, it was not something that ended tonight. I could have stepped back then, could have created distance, could have said something to close this, to return it to something manageable, but I did not, because standing there felt like standing at the edge of something I did not understand yet, and walking away now would not make it disappear. "Beginnings require choices," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of the moment. And this time, when he looked at me, there was no subtle shift, no almost change, just a clear, direct focus that made everything else feel distant. "They do," he replied, and then, after a brief pause that felt more intentional than any silence before it, "And you already made yours." And the certainty in that statement settled into me in a way I could not ignore, because deep down, I knew he was not talking about standing here. Not really. He was talking about something earlier, something quieter, something that had started long before I stepped out onto this street, and the realization of that made it impossible to pretend this was still something small. His words did not feel like pressure, they felt like gravity, something steady and inescapable that did not need force to pull me closer. And I realized then that what unsettled me was not what he was doing, but how little he needed to do to keep me standing here. "You talk like everything is already decided," I said, my voice quieter now, not weaker, just more aware. Because arguing against certainty required more than resistance, it required belief, and I was not sure I had enough of that. Left in this moment, he watched me without interruption, without the need to fill the silence, and that silence stretched again, not uncomfortable, not empty, but deliberate, like he was giving me space to hear my own words before he answered them. "Not everything," he said finally, and there was something different in his tone this time, something that felt less like control and more like acknowledgement, just the parts that matter. And that distinction settled into me in a way I could not immediately explain, because it suggested choice still existed, just not where I thought it did. I shifted slightly, my fingers brushing against the edge of my bag, grounding myself again in something familiar, something simple, because the longer I stayed here, the more abstract everything felt, like I was standing inside a conversation that was about more than what was being said. And what part is that? I asked, and this time the question was not a challenge. It was genuine, because I needed to understand where this line actually was, where his certainty ended and mine began. His gaze did not waver, but there was a pause, brief, intentional, like he was choosing his answer carefully, not because he did not know it, but because he understood what it would do once it was spoken. You, he said, and the simplicity of it made it heavier than anything else he could have said, because there was no explanation attached, no elaboration, just that single word placed between us like something that did not need justification. My breath caught, just slightly, not enough to show, but enough for me to feel it, because hearing it said out loud changed something, made it real in a way that could not be ignored or dismissed. You do not know me, I replied, and there was something in my voice now, not defensive, not uncertain, just honest in a way that felt exposed, because that was the truth, the simplest, most obvious truth in this entire situation. No, he agreed again, and that agreement came easier now. Like contradiction was not something he relied on, but I know what I see, and the way he said it made it clear that, to him, that was enough. The air between us shifted, not in tension, but in focus, like everything had narrowed down to this one point, this one understanding that neither of us could step around anymore. I looked at him then, really looked, not just at the control, not just at the presence, but at the stillness beneath it, the kind that did not come from calm, but from discipline, from years of learning how to exist without reacting, without giving anything away that was not meant to be seen. And what do you see? I asked, because if this was going to continue, if this was going to mean anything at all, I needed to hear it, needed to understand what had been decided about me without my input. This time, there was no pause, no hesitation, just a direct answer delivered with the same quiet certainty as everything else. Someone who does not step back when she should, he said, and the words settled into me immediately, not as judgment, not as criticism, but as observation, and the worst part was, I could not deny it, not after everything that had already happened tonight. I exhaled slowly, because hearing it said out loud made it harder to pretend otherwise, harder to hold on to the version of myself that would have walked away without looking back. And that is enough? I asked, even though I already knew the answer, even though something in me had already started to accept it. He held my gaze, steady, unwavering, and for the first time, there was no subtle shift, no almost smile, just clarity, direct and unfiltered. For me, he said, and that distinction mattered more than anything else, because it made this personal in a way nothing else had made it. About him and me, not power, not control, not circumstance, but something far more deliberate. The city around us continued, distant and unchanged, but in that moment, it felt irrelevant, like everything outside of this space had faded into something secondary. I could still walk away, I knew that, could still choose distance, could still return to something simpler, but the truth was, standing here no longer felt like hesitation. It felt like awareness, like I was seeing something clearly for the first time and choosing not to ignore it. And as I met his gaze without looking away, without stepping back, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else he had said tonight. This was no longer about whether I could leave, it was about whether I wanted to. And that was a question I was not ready to answer yet. The question lingered between us, not spoken, not answered, but present in a way that made everything else feel secondary. Because once you realized you had a choice, you could not pretend you did not. And once you admitted you were not using it, that became a decision of its own. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself, not to escape the moment, but to stay inside it without losing control. Because that was the only thing I still had, the ability to choose how I stood here, how I spoke, how I responded to something that was quickly becoming more than just a conversation. You are very certain, I said, my voice quieter now, not challenging, not defensive, just acknowledging what was already clear, because denying it would not change anything, and I had stopped pretending that it would. He did not respond immediately, his gaze holding mine with that same unwavering focus. But there was something else there now, something beneath the control, something that felt less like calculation and more like attention, not the kind that passed, not the kind that shifted easily, but something fixed, deliberate in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Certainty comes from patterns, he said after a moment, and his tone had shifted again, not softer, but more measured, like he was explaining something rather than stating it. And you do not follow them. And that statement settled into me differently than the others, not as something imposed, but as something observed, something he had reached on his own without asking for confirmation. I tilted my head slightly, considering that, because it was not entirely wrong, but it was not entirely right either, and the space between those two things felt important. Or maybe I just do not follow yours, I replied, and there was a quiet steadiness in my voice now, something that had grown stronger with every exchange, something that felt less like resistance and more like definition. His expression shifted, not in surprise, not in disagreement, but in recognition, like he had been waiting for that distinction to be made. That is the same thing, he said, and for the first time, there was something almost reflective in his tone, like he understood the weight of what he was saying beyond its surface meaning. The night air moved slightly around us, a faint breeze that broke the stillness just enough to remind me that the world was still there, still moving, even if this moment felt suspended outside of it. I glanced past him for a second, at the car, at the quiet street stretching beyond it, at the path I had been walking before this stopped me, and I realized that path still existed, unchanged, waiting, just as available as it had been before. If I leave now, I said slowly, turning my attention back to him, does this end? The question was simple, but it carried more weight than anything else I had asked, because this was no longer about understanding him. It was about understanding what this meant for me. He did not hesitate this time, not even for a second, and that lack of hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. No, he said, and the certainty in that single word settled into me deeper than anything else tonight, because it removed the illusion of distance, the idea that space alone could separate this into something manageable. I nodded once, not in agreement, not in acceptance, just acknowledgement, because I had expected that answer, even if I had not wanted to hear it. And if I stay? I asked, and this time my voice was steadier than before, not because I was less aware of what I was asking, but because I had already begun to understand it. His gaze held mine, unwavering, and for the first time, there was no subtle shift, no measured response, just clarity, direct and unfiltered. Then it begins, he said, and those words felt different now, not like a statement, not like a declaration, but like something closer to an invitation, one that did not demand acceptance, but did not disappear if it was refused. I felt my pulse steady, not slow, just controlled, because this was the moment everything had been building toward, the point where uncertainty narrowed into something defined, something that required more than observation, more than reaction. I could still walk away, still choose the path I had been on before tonight, but I understood now that leaving would not erase this, would not undo what had already shifted, and staying would not create something new. It would simply acknowledge what was already there. I met his gaze fully then, without hesitation, without looking away, and for the first time since this began, I was not trying to understand him. I was trying to understand myself, trying to decide what this moment meant beyond him, beyond the presence, beyond the control. And in that quiet space between question and answer, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else. This was not about whether he had chosen me. It was about whether I was willing to admit that, somewhere along the way, I had started choosing this too. For a moment, neither of us moved, not because we could not, but because something in that space did not require movement. It required recognition, and I felt it settle quietly into place, the kind of understanding that did not come all at once, but arrived in fragments until it became impossible to ignore. I looked past him again, at the street stretching into the distance, at the path I had been walking before this moment interrupted it, and I realized it was still there, unchanged, waiting, but it did not feel the same anymore, not after everything that had shifted inside me. I could leave, I knew that, could take a step back, turn, and walk away without another word, and nothing would physically stop me. No hand, no command, no force, just the quiet weight of what I now understood. You make it sound simple, I said, my voice steady but softer than before, not because I was uncertain, but because I was aware of how much this mattered. Like there are only two directions, and I turned my gaze back to him, meeting his eyes fully, without hesitation, because there was no point in pretending I was not here, not anymore. He did not move, did not interrupt, just watched, the same controlled stillness holding him in place, and for the first time, it did not feel like distance, it felt like space, space for me to decide what came next. There are always more, he replied, his tone even, but there was something beneath it now, something quieter, something that felt less like certainty and more like allowance. But most people choose between the ones they understand, and that settled into me differently than everything else he had said, because it shifted the focus, not on him, not on what he wanted, but on what I was willing to see. I let that sit for a second, feeling the truth in it, the way it connected to everything that had already happened, because this was not about being pulled into something, it was about stepping into it with open eyes, and that difference mattered more than anything else. I exhaled slowly, my fingers relaxing at my sides. The tension I had been holding finally loosening, not disappearing, just changing, becoming something steadier, something I could actually stand on. And what if I do not understand this yet? I asked, and this time the question was not defensive, not resistant. It was honest, because that was the only thing that felt real in this moment. His gaze held mine, unwavering. But there was a shift again, subtle, but clear enough that I felt it, like something had softened at the edges without losing its shape. Then you learn, he said, and the simplicity of it made it feel more real, not less, because it did not promise clarity, it did not promise ease, it only acknowledged that. Understanding was not immediate, and somehow that made it easier to breathe. I nodded once, not because I had decided everything, but because I had decided enough to know that walking away would not undo this. And staying did not mean losing myself the way I had first feared. The silence returned, but it was different now, not filled with tension, not waiting for something to break, just present, like a pause between two things that had already begun. I took a small step forward, not toward him exactly, just closer to the center of this moment, and I felt it, the shift, not from him, but from me, like something had aligned in a way that made sense for the first time tonight. His gaze followed, steady, aware, but he did not move, did not close the distance I had just shortened, and that told me everything I needed to know, that whatever this was, it would not be taken, it would be met. I am not someone you can decide for, I said quietly, not as a warning, not as a challenge, just as truth. Because if this was going to be real, it had to start there. He held my gaze, and for the first time, there was no pause before he answered, no calculation, just clarity, direct and certain in a way that felt different from before. I know, he said, and the weight of that acknowledgement settled into me deeper than anything else he had said tonight, because it meant this was not about control in the way I had assumed. It was about something else entirely, something that required more from both of us than I had expected. I let out a slow breath, feeling the last of the hesitation slip away, not because everything was clear, but because I had stopped needing it to be. The city around us remained unchanged, the street quiet, the night steady, but inside that stillness, something had shifted permanently, something that would not return to what it had been before. I glanced once more at the path behind me, at the version of the night that no longer fit, and then back at him, at the space between us that no longer felt like distance but possibility. Then do not expect me to stay, I said, and there was a faint steadiness in my voice that had not been there before, something grounded, something real. He did not step closer, did not reach for me, just held my gaze with that same quiet intensity. And when he spoke, his voice carried something new, something that felt less like certainty and more like truth. I expect you to choose, he said, and that was the moment everything settled into place, not as an ending, not as a resolution, but as something far more dangerous, something that would not fade when the night ended, something that would follow me long after I walked away or stayed. And as I stood there, no longer trying to Escape. No longer pretending this was something small. I understood one final thing that changed everything. He had not asked me to belong to him. Not yet. He had simply made it impossible for me to ignore that. In some quiet, undeniable way, I already stood where that question would be asked.